Hey guys, this is Atkinson's here, and today I just wanted to make a quick video on how to effectively use Warcraft logs. So let's start off with, what is Warcraft logs and why do we care about it? Well, Warcraft logs is a website that we use alongside with some Adobe software that we use that Selenia posts after raid every day on the Warcraft logs tab here. And it shows us kind of all the ins and outs of what each pull was. And it also ranks us in comparison to everyone else who uploads their Warcraft logs with their respective guilds and whatever. And we get rankings called parsers. And kind of like the importance of it is to how to better improve yourself, or how to kind of get an idea of where you should be relative to everyone else. So let's take a look at last night's Warcraft log and see examples of how we can look at this to better improve ourselves. Let's take myself, for example, my mage Kyrian. So last night I always ran Arcane Mage on single target fights, and then Frost for kind of like add cleave heavy fights. So let's take a look at Heroic Talic here. If we click on my name here, we'll be able to see a timeline of all the damage I've done relative to the spells I've cast. So here, as you can see, red is Arcane Blast, blue is Arcane Barrage, and green is Arcane Missiles, with this little tiny kind of periwinkle type of blue, the Azurite trait Rezon's Fury. So as you see here, not a lot going on in Arcane Mage. It's just AFK spam, Arcane Blast, just burn until I run out of mana, then I cast the Evocation, and then, you know, burn and conserve. But anyways, let's take a look at how I myself can improve on my DPS. So just looking at the timeline here, we have me peaking at about 30k DPS once Time Warp is cast, relative to the timeline in this case. But I do have some drops here where I'm really not doing any casts or any DPS here. So that's something to take into consideration, whether it's like my positioning or if it's an unavoidable type of fight or phase where I can't really do damage. That's something to take into consideration. And we can also look at the summary bar for when a lot of things happen. So here we have the overall damage being done, you know, kind of dipping in and out. We have healing received, damage taken. So you can kind of guess like where in the timeline this is. But also we can go on to the boss, if I can find a tab for it, if I can just exit it out. Here we go, enemies. And damage done. So we can also see exactly what it is that we're being damaged by on these specific timelines. So if I click on environment here, which I believe will be just like fall damage and all that stuff, or here it is, yeah, Bloodstorm, Plasma Discharge, Sanguine Static. These are Bloodstorm. All these are avoidable, honestly. So here we can see the spikes of where all these damage occur, and we can kind of compare that to the positioning of myself and the damage relative done at these current phases. So it could be that I'm not damaging the boss at a specific phase because I'm dodging Plasma Discharge, for example, but that's something I can obviously accommodate for because I can use some spells that let me instant cast DPS spells. So that's something, you know, everyone can take into consideration specific to their class, you know. So there's that we're getting through, and there's also something else that we can take a look at. So let's go back here to the focus on me, and let's go to timelines here with casts. So here you can see the exact moment every single spell you do is cast, whether it's like a racial or a class specific spell, or even like an Azurite like popped up. So here we have, okay, maybe not Azurite, sorry, my bad. But here we have my opener. So from what I've learned in a couple higher ranked players, I see them do charge up, which gets me 4 arcane charges maxed out, and then I just go straight into the burn phase, pop my trinket that gives me like a ton of haste, pop arcane power with the talent I have overpowered, where I just get a massive power spike in using arcane power, and I just spam arcane blast all the time. So this is kind of like a consistent spam until here. Now what happened here in this little gap here? So I do my arcane missile proc, and then I finished off with arcane barrage just to get a nice little tick of damage right before I cast evocation. Evocation is the reason why there is this large gap of where I'm not doing damage. So once evocation is done, I go back into spam, but there isn't as much of a consistent spam as there was here. So that's something to take in consideration, whether it's like you do a proc that triggers the GCD to go up, or if you're moving in specific parts. So let's check here at like almost the 145 mark, which would be 105 in seconds. Unfortunately, this only shows specific seconds, so you're gonna have to do a little math to figure out where you're at. So here I have arcane missiles, and then I blinked. I blinked here because I probably had to dodge a specific mechanic. And I also have a failed cast here where I tried to start it, but I couldn't. And I also have prismatic barrier. So in this about 10-second segment, I could be doing more DPS if I was better positioned. Now, talking about positionings, we could see how we can improve ourselves relative to people on the top parsers. So how do we do this? Let's go up here on the top left, and we're going to go to rankings for Old Year. Here it lists the top DPS overall. You get a score in Warcraft logs per boss that you've downed based on the type of the amount of DPS you did relevant to everyone else, and you get like a score, kind of like a Raider IO score for Mythic Plus keys. So as we see here, the top scoring ones are usually Affliction Warlock, Beastmastery Hunter, Arms Warrior, Havoc Demon Hunter, and of the Sword. So let's take for example that we want to look at a specific boss. We go into this bar here and we click on Talic, for example, Mythic Talic. Now we see here a ton of parsers by a ton of classes, mostly Arcane Mage, Havoc Warrior, Havoc Demon Hunter, Arms Warrior, and Affliction Warlock. We have this little anomaly here with the Balanced Druid, but we'll get into that in a second. So let's click here on Dajo. Let's click on the arrow point down. Here I can see the talents he's running. So the first thing I notice is that he's running Rune of Power, where I'm running Incanter's Flow. And this is quite a large variance in DPS. Why is that? Well, not to get too specific into mage roles, and specifically Arcane Mage, Rune of Power drops an AoE, or not AoE, but a little circle around me, small circle, about like 3 yards radius, and it boosts my power by 40%. Now, this is kind of like a risky talent to take, but if you know the fights very well, you can use this to your advantage. This will actually boost your output power by a large margin. So this means that I have to be specifically positioned every fight so that I wouldn't be stacking anything or doing anything that requires me to move as much as I want to when Rune of Power is down. Also, we also see the Azerite powers that they take. Mainly the top 3 will be shown here on the right side alongside their trinkets. And we have their gear here. Now, to clarify something, this guy is eye level 373. The blue pieces here are gear that you get from dungeons. So this isn't to say that he has less than 340 eye level gear. This just distinguishes what he got from raid or world boss as opposed to a dungeon. So that's something to take into consideration. If we click on Dajo's name here, we'll be brought to his Warcraft log where he got this specific parse. So let's take a look and click on his name. So we have an interesting graph here where he has a spike at about like 40 something DPS here, or yeah, 40k something DPS here, and he spikes pretty often. So what's going on here? Well, in this fight, they're casting Time Warp in the beginning. I'm gonna assume this Bloodlust is because someone like didn't died in the beginning and just didn't get the Bloodlust until this phase or whatever. So let's take a look at these casts. So he has more Azurite traits than I do, which is important when you're trying to min-max your parses. But there's something interesting going on here. If we look at timelines, we could see on casts, we could see his opener. What is his opener? So whereas mine was charge up into Trinket, into Arcane Power, he kind of buffers it with Arcane Blast. So Arcane Blast, you can pre-cast it before the pull timer. I think it's like a second cast. So when the pull timer's at 1, you hit your Arcane Blast, so you can charge it up. So at the 0 mark, you'll start off with whatever damage you do, which is usually like 8k damage at my eye level. So what he does here, he Arcane Blasts at the 0.5 second mark, but he queues up charged up in manipulating the global cooldown mechanic. So to go a little bit into queuing, you can queue up spells based on global cooldown mechanics. What does this mean? So when you're casting something that requires a duration for cast, you can instantly queue up the next spell to start immediately at the end of that cast, because the global cooldown will start at the beginning of the cast of the spell you're casting. So you can kind of manipulate this into timing sections. So here he starts off with an Arcane Blast, goes into charge up, he casts Time Warp because that's not on the global cooldown, and then he does another Arcane Blast and queues up Rune of Power. This is where he starts changing it up from what I do. So he has 2 spells that he casts to have a baseline DPS before he goes all in. He casts Rune of Power, he's got Arcane Power up from the GCD, he uses his racial, troll racial, which also increases haste by 15%, and he just goes nuts. He goes spamming Arcane Blast at such a small cast time, and also he does something to avoid mechanics. So when he is forced to move because of the Mythic Talic mechanics that we have not seen yet, unless you've done Mythic Talic, you kind of have to move in some cases, and Arcane Mages have this ability where the next 2 Arcane Blasts you cast are instant. So you can just be freely moving and cast your spells and keeping up your DPS. And then he just goes back into Rune of Power, and he just goes back to the burn phase until he goes to Evocation, and then he just goes burn conserve. So this is a way you can kind of see where you're at in terms of how you should be approaching your class DPS wise, how you can min-max your stuff, and how other people are doing it. You know, we have a ton of websites like Blood Mallet here, where it'll show us like the best like trinkets, Azurites in terms of like simulations, but these simulations don't really account for the playstyle that you like to take. Sometimes there'll be other stuff that'll do more in the actual raid than they do in simulations. So what do I mean by that? Let's take a look back at the Talic ratings or parses, and let's take a look at this Balance Druid. So this is kind of an anomaly because there's no other Balance Druid in the top 100, and this guy is just there. Why is that? So if we take a look, he's taking some talents. I don't know Balance Druid talents, so I don't really care about that. That's kind of like a mid-maxing thing for people who play that class. He's got some trinkets here. He's got the PvP trinket. He's got Vigilance Blood Shaper, which is kind of an RNG thing. But this is interesting. He's got triple Lively Spirit. What does Lively Spirit do? Well, when Innervate expires, your intellect is increased by 77 for each spell the target casts. So if we're triple stacking it, that's actually 231 intellect for each spell the target casts using Innervate, and it lasts 20 seconds. That's insane. So Innervate doesn't last for that long. It's like what, 10, 12 seconds. in that time, if you have the right class that you cast Innervate on, you could really get maybe like 10 casts off. Maybe like if you put it on the Resto Shaman that's running Echo of the Elements, where Riptide and the other totems get a 2 charge instead of 1 charge, so you can just spam that off the global cooldown. So let's take a look at this guy's Warcraft logs. Click here on his name to see his exact damage. Whoa, this is interesting. This is nothing like the arcane one we saw on the second top parse. So here we have his opener. His opener is doing a ton of damage, peaking at like 55k DPS, and then he kind of just drops down stagnant, you know, dot class, whatever, blah blah blah. And he's kind of like stagnant here too, which is kind of interesting, where Moonfire is really the only one doing damage here according to this graph. And then we have this large spike when Time Warp is cast. So what's going on here? Well, let's look at his timelines and casts. So here you got his dots going on, you got whatever he is, and here he has his troll racial. So I guess, you know, trolls have the best racial because increased haste. So we're gonna go about the 310, 307 mark. So that's like what, 187 for that mark. Let's see here. Yeah, so it's right here. So you cast Time Warp, and he casts Innervate on someone, and he's just going ham. He has his racial passive that's he's gonna proc later here, and he's got his pre-proc going here. So he's just going nuts on this parse, and he spiked all the way up to 80k. Let's take a look at what that Azurite trait does in Sims. So if we go here on Blood Mallet, we have the Sims for stacking Azurite traits. It's not doing as hot as the Laser Matrix or Archive of the Titans, which is the main Azurite trait in the Azurite gear that you get in Old Year. So what can we draw from this? Well, Azurite traits in DPS Sims are always a nice like baseline to have, but it all comes back to the way you play your class. All these Sims have a specific algorithm for every class that will always play the same. What it doesn't account for is your preferred playstyle. Your preferred playstyle will always take precedence over these things because you will have a better mindset in this playstyle, that you have just timing of abilities down, you have like all these procs that you think you're gonna get, you're more comfortable with your playstyle than the meta playstyle. So that's something I want you guys to kind of consider when you're picking your Azurite traits and stuff. But it also doesn't hurt to look back at all these rankings. You know, some people could find new things like the triple Lively Spirit comp, or like all these Azurite traits and talents that they're taking. You can also narrow this down to a specific spec. So let's say I want to go to Arms Warrior. Here we have the top Arms Warriors, top 100 in parses, along with the respective eye level, DPS, when the log was processed, and how long the fight was taken, along with all their Talos, Trinkets, and Azurite. So if you're trying to min-max top parses, you should also take consideration of the fight as well, because it's easier to maintain a high DPS consistently on a shorter fight than it is a longer fight. It is much longer. You have more mechanics to deal with if you're wasting too much time based on your comp. But that's something you should consider, and you should always, you know, take a look at the logs of everyone and see if like there are specific race that's going on. Most of these are horde parses, and I think that's because personally they have the better racial powers, especially with the trolls having a 15% extra cooldown, which is nuts. But that's something I want you guys to consider when looking at these parses and looking further into Warcraft logs on how you can better yourself in these terms of cases. So once again, guys, my name is Atkinson. I'm my main is right now Mage Kyrian, who's all 3 specs. I have a Shaman that I'm in Resto right now, and I just recently transferred my Demon Hunter for off tanking called Kuzora. If you have any questions or anything you want to talk about regarding Warcraft logs, please private message me in Discord. I'm named Atkinson as well on Discord. You can also private message me on any of my characters. And I think I'm going to make another video in the upcoming week on the add-ons because I've had so many requests about the add-ons that I use and why I use them. Whether it's professions or it's weak auras that I use that are class specific, and how I edit them to fit my standards on like when I want something to be called out on DBM and all that stuff. So if you have any specific requests that you want me to go into, whether it's like your class specific weak aura or Mythic Plus weak auras, add-ons that'll help you with herbalism or all that stuff, setting up TSM I know has been a big one that people wanted to like kind of see, and just getting stuff done like that, please just message me. I'll be more than happy to make another video of these. And today is raid day, so let's try to get Mythic Talic down today, guys.